Jessica from Sallie Tomato. I'm going to show you how easy it is to add a button on with your sewing machine. So I've already marked the center points of each of my buttons, and I have my button sewing foot on my machine. What's unique about this button sewing foot is there is a lever on the back side, so when the foot is on your machine, there's actually more downward pressure on the front of the foot to help hold whatever you're sewing in place. There's also a rubber grip on the front of the foot, and that helps keep your button or charm or whatever you're sewing down from shifting underneath the needle when you're sewing. So I'm going to put this back on the machine. So I have a sample here where I've sewn on some charms with the button sewing foot, snaps, 2-hole buttons, and then 4-hole buttons. So you can do the diagonal stitch or you can sew just straight across. And I'm going to show you how to do that with a 4-hole button. So this is the position that I want the center of my button. So I'm going to lay it over the center, and I'm just going to do straight across and stitch across from the left to the right, and then I will have to reposition to do the front 2 holes of the button. So try your best to center it in between the blue grips and set your machine to a zigzag. Another important thing when you're sewing buttons, you don't want the button to move forward or backward at all. And on this particular machine, we can't lower the feed dogs, so we're going to set our stitch length to 0 so our feed dogs won't move at all. Another important thing is that you'll want to test before you begin sewing. So we're on a zigzag stitch right now. Most buttons are 4 millimeters apart for the holes. So we're going to try this, and our needle fits perfectly in that hole. And now it's going to come over to the right side. And it's a little close, so I'm going to narrow the zipper foot by just turning my dial on my machine a little bit narrower, and try with your turn wheel again to turn it to see where the needle lands in the holes. And that's a little close yet, so I'm just going to move the button over a little and try it once more because it wasn't quite centered. So that looks pretty good. Now we can use our foot pedal and do about 8 to 10 stitches in total. Once you finish sewing the 8 to 10 stitches, then move your needle, turn your hand wheel so the needle is in the highest position, and we can cut our threads and cut them so you have a generous amount of thread to work with. To finish off the thread tail, we're going to thread it through a hand sewing needle and poke it through one of the holes on the button and bring it to the back side. And it's okay if the needle comes off because now we're going to tie our threads together on the back. Just knot it a few times, and this will secure the tails on the back side. So we can trim our threads. You can add a drop of seam sealant on the back of the button to keep the stitches in place. So that's how you sew a button on that would be flat on your project. So this is nice for a pillowcase because we won't be opening the pillow very often. If you're putting a button on a garment or something that you'll be opening more often and using the button, then I'd recommend putting on a shank. And I'll show you how to do that with this same button sewing foot. To use this same foot to make a thread shank for your button, use a thicker needle, and there's a hole right in the center of the foot that you're going to stick the needle through. So just stick it through the foot straight in. And now we can position our button over our marking point and underneath the foot. And now we can turn our hand wheel to make sure that it doesn't hit the sides of the buttonholes. And you'll notice that the thread gets caught on the top of this needle, and that's what we want. So that way there's the extra thread for the shank underneath the button. So that looks good, and now we can use our foot control and sew the rest of the button with 8 to 10 stitches. So cut your threads with a generous amount again. We can take out that needle. So you'll notice that there is some extra thread on top of the button, and that's what we want to create the shank. So I already have my hand sewing needle on the tail that we cut, and I'm just going to put it underneath the button and not through the fabric. So just get it so the thread is coming underneath the button. Now, shimmy the button so the thread is nice and tight, and then wrap your extra thread around the bottom of the button to create the thread shank. And you can do that about 8 or 10 times. And then we'll sink this back to the backside of our project. Now you can remove the hand sewing needle and tie your tails together. Then we'll trim off the extra, and again you can add on some seam sealant on the back. And see, here is a big difference between the button with the shank and then the button without a shank. Now you know how easy it is to sew a button on with your sewing machine. I have made a separate video if you want to learn how to make a buttonhole using the buttonhole foot on a sewing machine. Thanks for watching! For more of my BL9 adventures, click on any of the tutorial videos.